If you have your Bible, turn with me to the book of 1 Samuel chapter 30. Now, to give you an idea of where we are in this particular portion of Scriptures, Saul is still, in a sense, king. God has rejected him as king, but he is still viewed as king, and he still tried to kill David on more than one occasion. So David does a lot of wandering and a lot of moving around in the book of 1 Samuel. And we come to verse 1 of the 30th chapter. And it came to pass, when David and his men were come to Ziklag on the third day, that the Amalekites had invaded the south, and smitten Ziklag, and burned it with fire, and had taken the women captives that were therein. They slew or not any, either great or small, but carried them away, and went on their way. So to give you, they burned and destroyed the city, but they haven't killed anybody. They just carried them off. So David and his men came to the city, and behold, it was burned with fire, and their wives and their sons and their daughters were taken captives. Then David and the people that were with him lifted up their voice and wept until they had no more power to weep. And David's two wives were taken captives, and Aham of Jezreelites, and Abigail, the wife of Nabal, the Carmelite. So now we got David, and these men have seen this, and they've cried until they just can't cry anymore. Have you ever been in them shoes? Have you ever wept sore tears? David has. You can see that now. Now, those of you that are married, could you imagine if your spouse had been taken captive? What would your mindset be? And those of you who have some brothers and sisters, imagine if your brother or sister had been taken captive even. And David was greatly distressed. Now, would you be distressed at those things? Would y'all be distressed if your folks have been taken captive? But we're going up the ante a little bit, because listen to why else David is distressed. And David was greatly distressed, for the people spake of stoning him, because the soul of all the people was grieved, every man for his sons and for his daughters. So now all the people that's with David are thinking about stoning him. Now, let's put you into those shoes now. Let's say that someone you're close to, your wives or husbands, are taken captive, and now the people that you're with are thinking about killing you because of their grief. Would you be distressed? Have you ever been very, very distressed? It sounds like David is at this point. And it's not the first or last time that David will be distressed in his lifetime. You can read a lot of the Psalms, and I plan to be in few of them a little bit later. But David is distressed. He is depressed. He is grieved. And y'all can imagine that, right? I mean, I don't know how far we can even think that, because I haven't had to deal with that yet. But I have had times I've been distressed. How about you? Perplexed beyond what you've ever been perplexed before. Let's put it that way so we can put it in our minds. Think of a time that you were just perplexed and you were just troubled beyond any time you've been troubled before. Were you distressed? Were you troubled by it? I say I have been. I've been there. I won't lie to you. I've been there. But David has the right answer. But David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. There's your answer. We have a hymn that we sing sometimes that says, "Where could I go but to the Lord?" Where can you go other than the Lord? Now, we sang a song also that I called it number 302. Jesus has done all things well. But if you look at the verses, the first several verses of that song, you can tell Elder J.A. Monsees is distressed. He's in the cold world all alone, away from God, with a broken heart. Do you think David's heart was broken at this point? Have you ever had a broken heart? Felt like God is a million miles away? Even though he says he's always everywhere present, nowhere absent. And David later on in a psalm would say, "When I go up on top of the mountains or in the depths of the deep, behold, thou art there." But sometimes we don't feel his presence as we do at other times, do we? This was a time where David was in distress. But he encouraged himself in the Lord. Let's see what he does next. And David said unto Abiathar the priest and Ahimelech's son, "I pray thee, bring me hither a ephod." And Abiathar brought thither the ephod to David. And David inquired at the Lord, saying, so now David is a mind to worship, and David's going where? He's speaking to his God. Isn't that a good idea? What else should we do? Where else can you go for the answers? Who else has the answers? Think about this. What does God know? Does God know everything? Well, do you think God knows the answer to your distress? And then David has the question, shall I pursue after this troop? Shall I overtake them? Now, folks, if you ask the Lord a question, don't be surprised he gives you an answer. Now, in this case, he gave him an answer right away. It don't always happen that way. The Apostle Paul inquired of the Lord about a thorn in the flesh 3 times before he got his answer. But in this case, David gets an answer right away. And he answered him, pursue, for thou shalt surely overtake them, and without fail recover all. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. Was there any possibility that he wouldn't if he pursues? If the Lord tells you to do something, do you think he'll see through that you make sure it goes right, if you will? David asked, shall I go after them? And the Lord said, yes, pursue them, and you shall overtake them. Do you think there's any possibility that if David pursues, he wouldn't overtake them? Doesn't sound like it, because the Lord said to do it, and he's going to give them the ability to do it. Interesting concept. But it's hard to remember that sometimes when we're distressed. Because I'm sure David is still distressed. Would you be throughout the process? I mean, be honest with yourself. You're still in the same situation you were in before. Would you still be distressed? I would be. But can we be distressed and think on the Lord? Can we trust Him when we're in the cold world away from God? Yes. David seems to be trusting the Lord, but I still think, at least in his human nature, they may still be distressed. Although, let me also note one thing. The Lord has not given us a spirit of fear. Right. But has He given us grace sufficient to cope? Yes. Do you believe in the God of all grace? Grace for the life that you live, for the moments that you have now. Do we believe that in a God that is a very present help in time of need? See, you're not going to need the Lord's help when you go to glory. He's already took care of that to begin with. He set that in motion before the foundation of the world, paid for it on the cross, and He's going to call everyone that He has. But everyone that He has sometimes needs a little help for their journey, don't they? Have you ever been there? Have you ever been in a situation similar to David where you're perplexed and you're worried and you're distressed because you don't know the outcome? The good news is God does know the outcome and knows what you need before you ask. He knew what David needed. And I will say that He supplied what David needed. So David went, he and 600 men that were with him, and came to the brook of Besor, where those that were left stayed behind stayed. So he's got 600 men right now, and when he come to the brook, the ones behind stayed there. But David pursued, he and 400 men. For 200 abode behind, which were so faint they could not go over the brook Besor. So now David's men has been cut down by a third of people that just couldn't go any further. Can the Lord still bless with a smaller army? Look at Gideon and tell me He can't. You see, one thing that you'll have to remember is the Lord gets the glory for it. Amen. When the Lord's helped you through your journey, be sure to always thank Him. Amen. Now, I want to ask you a question. Do you think David knew where they went? Not entirely sure. Because here's a case where the Lord may have provided something else. And they found an Egyptian in the field, and brought him to David, and gave him bread, and he did eat, and they made him drink water. And they gave him a piece of a cake of figs, 2 clusters of raisins. And when he had eaten, his spirit came again to him, for he had eaten no bread nor drunk any water 3 days and 3 nights. So this man was hungry. Because I tell you, I go a day without eating, I'm about ready to go nuts. I mean, you can tell I hadn't missed a meal hardly at all. But this man hadn't eaten for 3 days. Do you think he might have been thankful for that food? And some water from these guys? Do you think that he was there with a purpose in mind, if God put him there with a purpose in mind? Because this is the next thing. And David said unto him, To whom belongest thou? And whence art thou? And he said, I am a young man of Egypt, servant of the Amalekite, and my master left me because 3 days agone I fell sick. So this man got sick and they left him. This guy's had a pretty rough go for about 3 days, hasn't he? They left him because he was sick. And he hadn't had anything to eat for 3 days and 3 nights. But he was right where he needed to be. Now I'm going to prove that. We made an invasion upon the Cherethites, upon the coast which belongeth to Judah, and upon the south of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire. And David said unto him, Canst thou bring me down to this company? So now, David is now asking, can you take me where I need to go? Do you know where these people are that burned the city and took the people? Lo and behold, he does. Because listen, he says, swear unto me by God that thou wilt neither kill me nor deliver me into the hands of my master, and I will bring you down to this company. Folks, can mercy be given to a man like this? Can David extend mercy to this guy? Yes. Now, he was in on it, wasn't he? He admitted it. That they were the ones that burnt the city, took the captives. And he knows where they are. Now, the question is, do you think the Lord can put a man in the way for David to do what David needs to do? I believe he did. Because this man knows where it's at. Now, he made him swear that he's not going to kill him or give him back to his master. I don't blame him for that. Now, here's another question. Can we do it good to all men? And it says do good to all men, especially those of the household of faith. So, of course, he's going to be good to his own people of his own nation. But here's a man and very much needed help himself, but provided the help that David needed as well. I believe the Lord is working on both ends of that deal. What about you? Amen. Can the Lord do that? Yeah. I mean, the Lord can do things supernaturally, but He doesn't always have to. He can direct the hearts and minds of His children to where He needs them. And I believe it still works today. How about y'all? Amen. Can God still direct you? Amen. Can the wind still blow where it listeth, not just for the work of regeneration and new birth, but can that Holy Spirit, the Comforter, blow upon our hearts every day, every time we need Him? I believe the Lord did in this case, and I believe He can for us. The wind can still blow where it listeth, even after the new birth. And when they brought him down, behold, they were spread abroad upon all the earth, eating and drinking and dancing, because of all the great spoil they had taken out of the land of the Philistines and out of the land of Judah. And David smote them from the twilight even unto the evening of the next day. And there escaped not a man of them, save 400 young men, which rode upon camels and fled. So 400 of them got away. But did the Lord bless David to prevail? Yes. Again, you got to give the credit to who? It's got to be the Lord, because they've already conquered Judah and they conquered the Philistines. And now here is David with 400 men. And what has happened? The Lord blessed abundantly. You see, I want to ask you a question. Do you believe Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20? On Him that is able to do what? exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think. I believe that's still in good today. I think that's a promise still there. I still believe that the Lord is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that I ask or think, even in the face of times I'm distressed. Even in the times of my worry, in the times that I forget to put my trust where it belongs. Anybody ever been there? Have you ever forgot to put your trust in the Lord and try to figure it out on your own? You know what happens when you do that? I can tell you of a situation where they tried to figure it out for God and we're still suffering the consequences today. Abraham was promised a seed, right? Isaac. They tried to go ahead of the Lord with Sarah's handmaid Hagar, and she bore Ishmael, which was a wild man. Are we still suffering the consequences of such a thing? Yes. Today, 4,000 years later, we still suffer for the error that Abraham forgot to trust the Lord and believe in the promises that the Lord had made. The Lord said He would make him a great nation. And now Abraham is the father of 2 nations, and one is a wild nation. And their hand is against every man to this day. Don't try to outsmart the Lord. Trust that He is able. And trust His promises. That's hard to do. It's easy to come up here and talk it. Especially in the church. And we got the Bibles open. We got it here. But it's harder when we're on our job sites and when we're in our daily lives to remember that the Lord is still on the throne outside of Sunday and Wednesday nights. Amen. He's still in the business of His grace being sufficient for you guys when you go to school. His grace being sufficient when you go to your workplaces. His grace still sufficient when you are doing your day-to-day activities, whatever it is. Amen. That God's grace is still what? Sufficient. Still able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that you ask or think, mainly because He's all-powerful and all-knowing. And even to a greater extent, He says that He careth for you. Now, you could say He cares for His people on a sprawl level, and He does. But think about the idea that He says that I love you. And I love you. He knows the very hairs of your head are numbered. He knows, David in that song, we already made a little bit of a mention of it. He says that He knew his down sitting and his uprising. He was acquainted with the words in his mouth. And the Lord knows what you think before you say it. How many times do you read in the New Testament in the Gospels that Jesus had perceived their thoughts? Do you think the Lord still perceives your thoughts? Do you think He perceived David's thoughts? Yes. Do you think He perceived Jacob's thoughts when he was going back to meet Esau? I've heard Elder Ricky preach many sermons about that. He's coming to meet you in the morning with 400 men. And Jacob was distressed. And Jacob did the same thing David did. He inquired of the Lord. Amen. If you go over to the book of Ezra, you see that Ezra, he looks at the state of the people and he sits and he's astonished at the evil. And he prays that the Lord will give them a little reviving. You think the Lord can still give a little reviving? Amen. I would love to see a little reviving. Now, don't get me wrong. I love to see a great revival. But maybe in the Lord's church in this land, that maybe the Lord will grant us a zeal. A group of people that believe that God is still on the throne and willing to stand for it. But sometimes we can look at the things around us and become distressed. We see the storms, we see the troubles, we see the evil. We must stand and be astonished like Ezra was. He was astonished. That's what the word means. It's astonished. Are you ever astonished at the evil of this world? Well, we ought to be more astonished with the Lord. Because He's bigger. And David recovered all that the Amalekites had carried away. Now this is verse 18. And David recovered all that the Amalekites had carried away, and David rescued his 2 wives. And there was nothing lacking to them, neither small nor great, neither sons nor daughters, neither spoil nor anything that they had taken to them. David recovered all. You know, when you think about it, you would be astonished, right? It shouldn't be. Because if you go all the way back to verse 8, it says, pursue, overtake them, and without fail recover all. And it says here in verse 19 that they recovered all. So now we're still back to the same premise. Is God's promise is still good? Is He still with His people? Did He make the promise and the promise be good? Is the promise that His grace is still sufficient and still good? I believe it is. Amen. I believe that you can go to Him in the wee hours of the morning to the great throne of grace to find help in your time of need. Amen. It says come boldly to the throne of grace, right? It didn't tell you that there was time that you have to come to the bold throne of grace. It can be any time. Let me give you an example. I was looking at my computer, and on top of it, it's got where it came from, and you can call their technical support anytime on Monday through Saturday from 9 to 7. So if you call at 8 o'clock, either side, you're not going to get anybody. But you can go to the throne of grace anytime because our God's never closed. Amen. Our God's never sleep. You remember the Elijah when he challenged the prophets of Baal? Maybe your God's asleep. Maybe he's on a journey. Well, the good news is your God's not asleep. He's not on a journey. He's everywhere present, nowhere absent. He's ready. And able. 3 Hebrew children said He is able. And I'm sure they didn't know how. And the proof of that is they said, even if you don't, we still won't serve your gods, King. They didn't know how it was going to work, but they knew it would. How about y'all? You think God's got a plan? You think He's still able? So let's be as David. When you're distressed, encourage yourself in the Lord. Amen. Be like Jacob. And encourage yourself in the Lord. It might take 3 tries like the Apostle Paul did. But was God's grace sufficient the whole time? Amen. I mean, let's be honest. Think about it. When he had the thorn in the flesh, those 3 times when he asked, was God's grace sufficient while he was asking? I believe it was. The thorn in the flesh didn't feel good. But the Lord was there the whole time. We talked about, sometimes you feel like He's a million miles away. He's always there. And He's always got the remedy. May the Lord bless you and keep you is our prayer.